Wow, right, we're back at Batco 2026 on the exhibition floor, and this time we're speaking to Michelle Lilly.
Yeah, absolutely. So I was very honored to present the opening keynote address today on mental health and wellness in emergency services. I'm a professor of clinical psychology at Northern Illinois University. I'm also a licensed clinical psychologist, so I do evidence-based treatment for PTSD, depression, anxiety, and emergency services and their families, and do some consulting as well. So sometimes I work with emergency service agencies that are struggling in any number of ways and try to help them figure out what's going on.
Yeah, you covered so much over the course of your 30 minutes. It's difficult to know where to start, to be honest with you. You're married to a police officer, aren't you?
I
So
am.
does that give you a sort of inside track on
Yeah.
the issues?
It does. Yeah, he is now retired. And so yes, it I started working in 911 before I even met my husband. So it's our second marriage. So I was not with him in policing from the very, very beginning. So I was more on the tail end of his career. But it was been very eye-opening. I think that I thought that I knew a lot more about policing just from the work that I had done in terms of research, and then being around somebody who's very engaged and has served many roles. So he was a homicide detective, worked at the Child Advocacy Center, has been very involved in unions and pensions, and so the level of just kind of knowledge and information that I've gained from just having him as my partner has been really quite enlightening.
Yeah, sure. Have you been able? Because obviously we're in the UK. Have you ever been to the UK before? I imagine you perhaps you have, or is
I
this your
have
first
not.
time? Have
I've
you not?
never been to the UK. Yeah, so
Okay.
I've presented at ENA when it was in Slovenia, and then when it was in Spain.
Yep.
Didn't go last year to Helsinki. But no, this is my very first time in the UK. I love it.
Right. Well, yeah, you're in Scotland yourself.
I did. We went up to Scotland for 3 days, and
Right.
so a couple days in Edinburgh, and then went up to the Highlands, and certainly not enough time.
No, it's nice of it. During your presentation, you said you like to meet people where they are. So, from what you've seen, I mean, I don't know how long you've been here and how much contact you've had with the emergency services up until this point, but where do you think we are compared to where you are?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I'm saying this with with the utmost respect. I think in the U.S. there's been acknowledgement of things like post-traumatic stress disorder, depression, anxiety, a little earlier than over in Europe and the UK. So I think there certainly has been lots of conversations about health and wellness, but I think maybe just a tick behind where we've been talking about in the United States. A lot of 911 centers, a lot of police departments, a lot of fire departments have already fully developed peer support programs. A lot of the states have legislation protecting confidentiality among individuals who are seeking support. And so I think some of that's in place here in the UK and is going in that direction, but certainly, not certainly, maybe a little bit ahead of the game.
It's a conversation that you can certainly see taking place. I mean, pretty much when you visit control rooms, mental health and well-being
Yeah.
is definitely at the top of the. But I've never heard PTSD be mentioned in the context of UK emergency services, and it stands to reason. Yeah. I mean, given the environment that they're working in.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. And, in the United States, there was published research on PTSD in police and fire really within the last 20, 25 years. The first one in dispatch was when I published in 2012. And so certainly talking about PTSD has been part of the conversation for several decades. However, it really has only been, I think, in the last decade that we're actually doing something about it. So even when I started talking about PTSD to law enforcement, to police, there was some resistance. But now you go to conferences, and a lot of people are actually now talking about it, doing something about it, acknowledging, evidence-based treatments for things like PTSD. So we're definitely gaining momentum.
Is that the result of a broader cultural shift, do you think, or
Yeah, I think
is
so.
it people are just becoming smarter over the course of time?
I think it's a couple things. One, there is the published research that kind of provides data, right? I think historically it's easy for people to kind of write it off when there was no actual data supporting people's experiences. I think at conferences now, there's very often a whole track devoted to wellness and mental health. People are talking about it. And I actually think part of it is the younger generation coming in, because the younger generation is a lot more willing to talk about mental health. Sometimes I lament how much they talk about mental health, because I'm like, you're not anxious, you're just struggling through life. But I do think that the younger generation is supporting more conversations about mental health, and they're doing a really nice job of drawing more boundaries, saying, I'm not going to work, like an 80 hours a week to do this. It's not worth it to me. And so they'll literally leave emergency services rather than do it. Where I think historically there's this idea of like, oh, once you're in, you're in, this is your career, and you're going to do until you either flame out or retire.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
I was tapping away when you ask the audience how many people think it's easy being was it? Do
Yeah.
you think it's easy being
Do
human?
people think it's hard to be human?
Yeah. So I put my hand up.
Yeah.
What was it? So I was tapping away on my iPad. What was the other the response from other people? Was it
Oh,
like 50-50 or something?
no. I think there was a handful of people who did not raise their hands. So
Right.
I think most people are willing to admit that life is hard.
Yeah, no, I
Right?
think you're
It
fooling
is
yourself.
really,
I think you're
really
fooling yourself.
100%. We are. Every time, and it's so funny because I'm now in my late 40s, and I think in my 20s and 30s, I thought, really truly thought, like, man, I'll get, my career will get settled at some point, and the family, and then, it's always just one thing after the next, right? It's always one challenge that you're confronting, and you might have some periods of calm in between, but life is not life is not easy. Life is really challenging, and when you add a really high stress, high stakes job on top of it,
Yeah.
it can make it even harder.
Well, with that in mind, I mean, you talked about technique, you talked about preparation, resilience in advance. So what mindfulness you spoke about,
Yeah.
mindful breathing.
Mhm.
Is there anything else?
Yeah, I think there's a lot. So mindfulness is always my go-to. There's so much robust literature supporting the development of mindfulness practices to bolster resilience.
Isn't
Um,
that primarily from CBT or other
well,
thing? Because I don't. I mean, I
yeah,
don't know.
no, of course. Yeah, so mindfulness is, has a very long tradition, starting with, Eastern traditions. And so really, we started talking more about mindfulness, at least in the United States, about 30, 40 years ago. And it's led to just a plethora of really compelling and robust literature showing that even brief daily practice of mindfulness can rewire your brain. So it's more contemporary. The people who think of it's more of contemporary, but a lot of I'm a cognitive behavioral therapist, and so but I integrate mindfulness all the time. So yeah, so I think mindfulness is a big one. I think learning early your own coping strategies and identifying those that work and those that do not. I think recognizing early on, especially, that doing the more problematic forms of coping, like drinking or, or just doing some other kind of stuff when you're stressed, is not going to lead to long term health. And it actually is going to perpetuate avoidance of suffering as well. So I think kind of warning against the ills of that. And then also helping people develop a resilience mindset, right? So the ability when you're under challenge to say, what can I learn from this? How can I grow from this? What is this teaching me about myself? Versus why is this happening to me? What am I going to do? How am I going to manage this? So helping people have more of that growth mindset as they're going into these challenges can be really helpful too.
And that's something that could be encouraged at an institutional level.
100%.
Imagine.
Yep.
Yeah.
100%.
Yeah. The other I guess and after the incident as well. I mean, what can organisations do? Because obviously you were talking about PTSD.
Yeah.
What can organisations do? I mean,
Yeah.
what care can they give, and
Yeah.
what care are they giving?
Yeah. So again, in the United States, there's a lot of traction behind peer support programming because a lot of people are not going to take the time to go see a therapist, or they don't have the resources, or they simply can't make it work in their lives, and or there's stigma, or there can be lots of barriers to people getting professional help. But people are more willing to look to the person next to them who's had a lot of the same experiences and say, man, that really was hard, and I'm really struggling. So peer support programming is certainly one of those. I think just more transparency about people's experiences. I think leadership is really on the hook for that, kind of sharing that this job is not easy. There can be distress. That doesn't mean that you're going to flame out. There are great ways to cope with distress. And so I think those are the big ones. Um, I think for me, it's really helping people, especially early career, just accept that it it is hard. And when you have
Right.
distress, it is normal. It's a very human reaction
Yeah.
to care about people who are calling you, even if you've never met them. So
I think in any job, there's the you sort of you kind of go to a place where you think I need to keep going no matter what happens.
yeah,
That's possibly just a natural human thing, but in that environment in particular, I guess even more so potentially, but that's potentially even more dangerous.
uh, yeah.
Um,
It's such a these jobs require such specific skill and
yeah,
training. So I agree. I think that you get through the training and you get through, and for some people, they come from families of
yeah,
emergency responders, and this just feels like what they're meant to do, and so you
yeah.
just keep moving forward. But I think what is hard is not just that it's you might have really distressing calls or incidents, but you might have two on the same shift, right?
Well,
You might
yeah,
have to go to one and then the next, and
yeah,
hopefully maybe you get a day off, but sometimes you can't
yeah.
because of staffing, and the next day you might encounter something totally new and different that's distressing.
Well, that's
So
a huge amount of responsibility as well.
yeah, yeah,
Um, one thing you did talk about, which I think is interesting, and another development, I mean, relatively recent development, is the idea of going into a control center, being in a visual environment.
uh-huh.
Um, and again, the conversation tends to be around what's going to be the impact on call takers, what's going to be the negative impact on call takers. But you actually talked about something quite positive in relation to it. So do you want to?
Sorry, I missed that last comment. You talked.
Um, the ability to send in footage from incidents
Oh,
to control
mhm,
centers,
yes,
making it a visual environment in
yeah,
inverted commas.
hmm,
And yeah, generally the discourse around that can be quite negative. They don't want to see all
yes,
this horrible stuff,
yeah,
in other words. But you brought up kind of positive aspects too,
yes,
didn't you? So do
yeah.
you want to talk a little bit about that?
Absolutely. So, when I first started working in comm centers, and again, that was about 10, 12 years ago, people would say, this is going to ruin the industry. Everyone's going to flame out. Everyone's going to struggle. There's going to be massive PTSD. Um, and so that's been part of the conversation for a long time. And while I certainly do think there's going to be there's going to be bad calls, right? Um, there are already bad calls that people experience. And so I cannot kind of sit here and say, no problem. However, from the PTSD literature and theoretical work, there's a lot of reason to believe that there is going to be a net positive effect. So we do know that seeing things is going to give you more information. So the more that we can save lives, the less guilt, shame, distress. We do know from the cognitive psychology literature that actually just hearing things is far worse than hearing and seeing things. So if you do a research study and you have one group that only hears, a horror film, one that only sees it, and one that sees and hears, the people who see and hear and the people who see it, no difference in terms of how distressing it is. But the people who only hear it actually have the most distress.
That's interesting.
And so there's a little bit of research. It's not prolific,
I was going to
right?
say that
It's
research
not,
is taking
yeah,
place.
yeah. And so, but there is literature to suggest that just hearing things is actually confers greater risk. And I
Right.
think it's because your brain fills in all these sometimes gory details or distressing details.
Yeah.
And if you're already somebody who's prone to having more of like a negative mindset, you're going to fill in more negative details.
Yeah.
And so I think there's reason to believe that there's going to be some real positive benefits from having access to video.
I guess closure is or rather lack of closure is a massive issue as well. So if
Yeah.
that potentially could benefit in relation to that.
100%. Yeah. So if you have a mom calling in, a new mom, and her kiddo has, fallen and kind of smacked their head and they're bleeding, right? They might be very, very distressed and
Yeah.
hysterical. But if you have access to the call, you can say, okay, well, head wounds bleed a lot, but it doesn't mean that, they're
Yeah.
severely injured.
Yeah.
And then, you kind of help them, get through
Yeah. Absolutely.
cleaning up the wound. And then you're like, oh, the kiddo was just fine, right? Versus not having that information, you might be thinking, man, this kid is, um,
Yeah.
in real harm,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. Yeah.
They might even die.
Yeah.
And so having that kind of information might also provide the closure that is helpful to people.
Yeah, and every children involved, the trauma even worse, isn't it? I would have thought.
100%.
Yeah.
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 Yeah. We don't like to, we grow up from very early age believing in meaningful cause and effect, right? We have to, right?
Yeah.
Otherwise the world would be lawless, right? So, we tell kids like, you can have a cookie if you eat your dinner, right? We even do with our animals, right? You jump on
Yeah.
the table, you're going to get sprayed with a water bottle. But there's some risk to that, right? That we kind of always think that there's meaningful cause and effect. And when tragedy happens with kids, it really deeply violates though that kind of central assumption that we have about how the world operates.
Yeah,
And
it
so
just doesn't make sense.
yeah, so it
Yeah.
can be quite distressing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Well, I'm good. If you are.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you for the conversation. It was
Yeah,
really
it was a bit of a
great.
whistle stop tour through. I mean, we could talk for a long time about.
Oh, I could sit
what
in
you
this
went-
in this
Yeah, I know.
in this recording studio and talk all day.
Yeah, yeah. But no, thank you ever so much, Michelle.
Yeah. Thanks
Very,
for
very
having me.
interesting. No worries at all. Thank you.
Thank
All
you.
right. Cheers.